Awesome. Perfect. Welcome, folks. Thank you for attending the last slow touring session of the season. My colleague Kaylee is here, who has spearheaded and organizing slow touring. For those of you returning, thank you so much for attending previous sessions. So today's session, we have our panelists Jenn Goodwin and Brandy Leary here with us. Thank you so much for joining us in our last session. We'd love for you all to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from, what community, an organization, if you're part of an organization. And the key question today is, are you an artist, agent, manager, presenter? Interested in creation partnerships or curious about what that is. So feel free to write that in the chat. I'm going to start by honoring past, present, and future Indigenous peoples as the original stewards and caretakers of the lands we present, showcase, and engage upon. I recognize the embedded colonial structures in the performing arts sector, including ways of thinking and knowing, inspiring our ongoing responsibility to decolonize our work and practices across the province. As we continue, please introduce yourself in the chat. And if you feel comfortable doing so, I encourage you to visit native-land.ca to learn more about the ancestral lands that we live upon. And I'm joining you from Scarborough, which is the east part of the city of Toronto. Jenn and Brandy, I'm just going to introduce you both by reading your bios. Jenn Goodwin is a Toronto-based dance artist, curator, and programmer whose practice focuses on dismantling barriers to art for both artists and the public. Her work and collaborations explore the play, power, and politics of the body in motion, the feminization of public space, and themes of women's presence, absence, and resilience alongside the choreography of everyday life. Jenn currently works with the Arts and Culture Division at the City of Toronto on Nuit Blanche, Toronto, and previously served as Curator of Public Programs for the Toronto Biennial of Art 2014. Jenn holds a Master of Curatorial Studies from the University of Toronto, where she received an award for exhibition All Our Days Are Full of Breath, and a degree in Contemporary Dance from Concordia. Her writing has appeared in the Journal for Curatorial Studies, Canadian Theatre Review, ANANDAM Dancetheatre, and the Dance Current. Thank you, Jenn, for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Nora and Kaylee. Hi, everyone.
Brandy, I'm going to read your bio as well. And then briefly, I'll have my colleague Kaylee just tell us a bit about slow touring to set the context, followed by some guiding questions with Jenn and Brandy. Brandy, hello. Brandy Leary is a choreographer and dancer whose work has been commissioned and presented across Canada, Europe, India, the Arctic, South Africa, and the United States in theaters, festivals, museums, galleries, urban sites, and natural landscapes. As a senior practitioner of Polaripiatu, she's trained for 2 decades with VM Vikas Gurukul in Kozhikode, India. As a performer, she has collaborated with Gitanjali Koland, Lee Su-fei, Jenn Goodwin, Chandralekha, and Denise Fujiwara, and appeared in Robert Eggers' film The Witch. She's currently training and collaborating with a contemporary choreographer, Padmini Chittoor. Leary is the founder and artistic director of ＡNANDAM Dancetheatre, choreographer of Why Not Theatre's internationally touring Mahabharata, and co-founder and co-director of Collective Space in Toronto. So that is Jenn and Brandy, and Kaylee. I'm just going to have you speak a bit about slow touring. That's okay.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name's Kaylee Wood. I'm the manager of the Slow Touring project here at Ontario Presents. And I won't take up too much time, but just for anyone that's new, or just to give a quick refresher of what we're talking about when we say slow touring, um, we've taken inspiration from other slow movements. You may have heard of slow food or maybe even slow tourism, which I think at large the slow movements are looking for ways to make our disparate sectors more ecologically sustainable and also more sustainable on the humans involved. And, in the food category, that would be from the folks planting and picking food in fields to those serving it at our tables. And in the arts, of course, that's folks, involved in creation, involved in production, involved in administration, and audiences and communities as well. So this is our umbrella project here at Ontario Presents. Um, if you want to go to the next slide, Nor, I can speak on that. We've focused in on these 5 principles of slow touring. I really don't think we need to be exclusive, but just for Ontario Presents, setting our goals around what we want to achieve in slow touring, we are aiming to transform touring to address mainly these 5 principles. So, first of all, equity and access for um, all kinds of marginalized artists, whether it's racially uh, marginalized or queer artists or caregiver artists or even working class artists. Those are all folks that I think currently have barriers to participating in the touring and presenting sector. And I think slowing down is one of the best ways to remove a lot of those barriers. We also want to see more meaningful connections between artists and the communities that they're visiting. We really want to address power imbalances that exist between artists and presenters or bigger arts institutions that artists are working within. Climate justice and sustainability, and the mental and physical well-being of artists and arts workers. So that's the goals embedded in slowing down for us. I often say slow is not a metaphor. Really genuinely taking more time to build relationships and do the work we do is the best way that I can see to achieve these 5 principles as best we can. So that's slow touring. I'll turn it back over to Noor. I'm really excited to hear today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. Um, Really quickly, captions are available. If you click below, so you can definitely toggle and put that option on if you need it. Um, I have spotlighted Jenn and Brandy. Hello. So we'll just start off with our first question, which is what is a creation partnership or residency in the performing arts field? And your experience of it as artists and art administrators.
Thanks, Nora. I'm like, sure, sure, Brandy. We'll just jam and riff off each other and go back and forth. Really great to be here. And both Brandy and I wear multiple hats and different as artists and organizers. I guess I could say some ways for me, residencies have looked like being invited into a space to work in that space, work on a project that I've been thinking about or need support on. And so sometimes that does equal space, which sometimes equals time, focused time and sustained attention. It's really nice when that comes with money because then that also adds, that obviously helps you like making work cost money. Um, Sometimes that's looked like materials. And sometimes there's also, there's sort of like these hard um, aspects in terms of like in terms of like space, money, etc. But sometimes it's support and advocacy and connections. Do you know this person? You should meet that person. That is actually like really important things also, I think, of what residencies can do. Um, I can talk a little bit more about types of residencies I've had. But I would also say, so as an artist, I've been invited into spaces, and that's been usually like very special and you carve out that time and space. Or as a programmer, you know, with my City of Toronto hat on as well, then I created a residency at one point called Nuit Connects, which I can speak a little bit more about as well. So I'll just do that general, and Brandy, I'll pass it to you as just sort of like a quick snapshot to start us off, but then we can start digging in.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's so great to be here. Um, when I was looking at the first question, I was thinking like, uh, to me, I think of like a creation partnership and a residency sometimes as different things that can overlap. And even just in our prep for this or reflecting on like residencies in general, like I understand that they can mean many different things to many different people, and then also it can mean a different thing to different practices. Like, I'm gonna speak from dance because that's what I work in a lot. Um, I've found the residencies to be an incredible tool to make work, again, with a kind of focused period of time, and that they become really pivotal, like for different iterations. Because I think one of the main things around slowness in general is just a sense of time, and it takes a lot of time to make work. So residencies become really pivotal, and different kinds or qualities of residencies become pivotal at different stages of a project. When I think of a creation partnership, like I think that might be something where a presenter as well as āNANDAM is bringing like multiple things to the table to create a work. Because we all know on either side, if we're commissioned, that's amazing. Often a commission is not going to hold the full budget to make a work, so there has to be some kind of partnership that motivates how we're going to create something. And then for me, residencies become a tool in that space to start developing work. Yeah, that's what I would offer to that.
Thank you. So Jen, you had mentioned that you created a residency. So I feel like we should get into a bit of the details about
Sure.
what kinds of residencies have you organized or spearheaded and also participated in, and what has worked and what hasn't. I also want to acknowledge that folks are sharing in the chat where they're from. Thank you so much. I think this is also good insight to see what like towns and cities folks are joining us from. But yeah, let's get into that.
Amazing. Sure. Yeah. And we can ping pong again, Brandy, but I would say I can start off with one that was a residency that I had the opportunity to create, which was working on Nuit Blanche. I've been on and off Nuit Blanche for 20 years since its inception. With some, I left a few times for my master's or a couple babies in there as well, and the biennial. But so in 2018, I came back to the city after doing my master's, and I had the ultimate privilege to work programming and producing the exhibition that was going into Scarborough. And I knew Scarborough a little bit, but not a lot. Hadn't spent a ton of time there, and that's why also for me, I really knew it would be a place of new relationships, new partnerships. And I feel definitely a responsibility as someone who works at the City of Toronto. It's like, what can the city bring that is meaningful and that matters? Um, and so working in Scarborough for that first amazing year, and also got to know Nora a bit, and like and some incredible other artists. But I was witnessing a kind of a community reciprocity and care that I had not really experienced or seen before, that I did not grow up with per se in Burlington, Ontario, where I'm from. It was just like this, and we were working at Scarborough Town Center, which really I was told and I started to witness was like a community center in a way. Like it was just held so many different stories and happenings and people's first kisses and people's like break dance battles. Like it is not just a place to go shopping. It had so much else going on, and so So anyways, through that, at the end of that first year, I just said, okay, we have to give something back. That's a more. We brought Nuit Blanche there. It was great. It went well. So we made a program called Nuit Connects, and it was simple in some ways, but I teamed up with Doris McCarthy Gallery, so at the University of Toronto Scarborough. So in that sense, that partnership came together. We each gave $5,000 to an artist who had previously been in Nuit Scarborough. And really, what I wanted to happen was that it was just money that they didn't have to answer to. We didn't need to know where they spent it, which can also be kind of rare for a municipality. Like, and that instead of like clocking things, we're like, we give you $10,000, which hopefully buys you a bit of time. And from the city and from Doris McCarthy Gallery, we can offer certain things. As the city, we had things like, do you want to talk to someone in marketing, sponsorship? We have people who are specialized in sound, in theater, in dance, in pyrotechnics. We have people who are, in solid waste management. We have so many different strange departments. We have the mayor. Do you want to talk to the mayor? And so a lot of different things happen. So Rise was the first artist, and so that's what the city brought. And then from Doris McCarthy Gallery, they also brought connections to gallery. What does it mean to work in a gallery, to have a residency in a gallery? And then people were also able to audit classes. So this was what Nuit Connects turned out to be. So here's $10,000. Here's what we offer. What do you want to take advantage of? You don't have to make any work, but if you want to, we'll try to support you. And so I guess it's like going into year 7 or 8 now. And so that continues. Yeah. So that's a little snapshot of when I started. And I'm happy that that's still going and Noor was part of it as well. I can talk in a little bit about others that I've been an artist in, but I'll pass it over to you, Brandy, because I know you provide these opportunities too.
Yeah, I think what I can offer into this is that Anandam as an organization also holds residencies not as a presenter, but to cultivate and resource and contextualize artistic practice. So we deal a lot with practitioners of South Asian dance, some interested in classical work, some having questions about contemporary work, some tethered to contemporary work coming out of India, some understanding like what are European aesthetics within a kind of practice that's situated here. So we're often looking at spaces or gaps in the sector that we can help hold or fill or resource. So we would often run a residency that is untethered from producing a work, which is just like 100, 200 hours of studio time, $6,000, $1,000 for a dramaturg, and like it's not tethered to you're presenting or producing something by the end of this, but really empowering artists who maybe haven't had an experience of like what it is to be in your practice, what it is to have supports to examine what you're making, like to understand process and what that process becomes for them. So out of that, like the irony of that is that everyone ends up like coming out with something very, very strong that then lifts off into other projects. So we're not a presenter in a formal sense, but like how to help artists and artists who are like emerging or moving into a professional field sort of understand how to situate themselves in a practice, in what they're making, and then move from there instead of thinking everything has to happen all at once. You only get one shot, so go. So we offer that kind of residency within the structure of the organization. And then just recently, we're in the first year of like, what is a choreographic development and training program for artists who are making work, and particularly making work from like a non-Eurocentric or a non-balletic lineage. And so and that choreography is a skill, not a given. It's a compositional skill. So we're just starting like a 2-year long program, like a cohort goes for 2 years, where they're both training skills around choreography, and also with embedded in that is a residency towards their own work that helps them with like public showings, access to funding. How is it to show work over a long period of time and have a conversation about it? What is it to learn to talk about your work and sort of learn its context? So that's sort of like not as clear as like artist presenter, but we're sort of like within our communities holding that volume of residency as something that becomes iterative towards what you may be making that you don't even know. And also, like, if you don't have a choreographic practice, it is very difficult to then just make a work, like to just jump in, like, okay, now go. So that's sort of like occupying a bit of a different space than moving something towards presentation, where it's resourcing artists to become more grounded and articulate and understanding of what they're making, how they're working, and what conversations their work then intersects in.
I can just, something you're talking about, Brandy, that you do so well too, is you make space for skill building. Like you say, that
Yeah.
it's choreography is composition. And just on a different kind of residency that I was offered recently, or because I don't want to say like I said, Burlington, I was not the same, very different place. The connections kind of then in the way Scarborough inspired me, but like no diss to Burlington because it actually came around for me later. Love my hometown, it's all good. But at one point I got invited to be an artist in residence at the Art Gallery of Burlington. And the curator, Suzanne Cart, which is very generous of her, and I actually said to her, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Because it's a ceramics. It's like they have guilds and they focus on things like ceramics." And she and I sort of laughed because I was like, I don't make objects. I make dances, and but I have always thought about I was like wanting to actually slow down in some ways and work with my hands, but I didn't know what. Am I knitting? Am I writing? What are these other ways of making for me that have interest? So she invited me, and after I got over the fact that it was a real invitation and she knew I had no skills yet, and she was okay with that, because she said she's looking at me as an artist, not necessarily at like what my wonky bowl series looks like for the first 3 weeks, and she's known me for a little while, and she says dance is a physical practice, ceramics is a physical practice. And it came at this point in my life where I was going back and forth to Burlington a lot because both my parents had passed in the past few years. And so it was this a beautiful grieving process for me that there I was working with clay at a wheel. And I really had to slow down. And I felt sometimes like a bit of the bull in the china shop. Like you can't just turn around. Like there's ceramics and breakables everywhere. And I really had to be conscious and ground my feet, ground my body with this clay, which comes from the earth. And my Wonky Bowl series is still a Wonky Bowl series, but I have made other objects. And when no one was there, I would try to dance with the clay or go in the opposite way of the wheel because I think I I would only do that right now when no one was there because I think the guild would be like, all right, girl, sell. Who is this artist in residence who's making this Wonky Bowl series who's dancing with the clay? But anyways, just to say that was such a gift in my life that I didn't even know and they didn't know really how much it was actually going to help me artistically, which I think I will continue with ceramics, and also that it helped me in this incredible grieving process and connected me back to where I was from. So invitations can be very special.
Yeah, and also it's this sense of like sometimes there's like we did a lot of experimentation this summer just with space with Why Not Theatre, like looking at issues within Toronto around space. So sometimes residencies can be very focused. This is for dance, this is for visual arts, this is for this is towards a presentation. But we did a project with Why Not Theatre this summer where we just opened a meanwhile space, and it was like as low barrier as possible, like no application, no project needed, just space. And people were just like, oh, that relieved a bit of an acupuncture point for people, because they were like, oh, I feel like I can come to the studio and like warm up for half an hour and not calculate that as a cost. Like I just spent $15 warming up and I'm here for an hour and I gotta do a thing. So that relationship of like time, or what you're saying, Jen, time to explore like a different look at what is choreography, what is material, how for dance, like how the body is operating, are really valuable, right? And again, coming back to slowness is also a length of time. An artist learning how long it takes to make something is always, I mean, I remain 2 decades in and absolutely astounded by how long it takes to do something. So, yeah, yeah,
I was going to just
time.
add to that too. It's like, so I often use the term long game, like to
Yeah.
think back, like in terms of slowness, it's like, an art career. It takes time to mature into that. And there's flashpoints of like, oh, this is cool, or I got this gig, or I have a cool idea. But as a lifetime maker, and even to realize that at one point, that's why something like another medium can come into my practice and I can be curious. And I understand that, like, oh, I'm interested in learning new skills. I don't need to become a potter, but there's no way also that my choreographic practice wouldn't intersect with almost anything I do, because that is absolutely embedded with who I am and how I see the world. Um, yeah, and that takes time to know that, and that confidence over takes time too, to walk in a room and know nothing and say like, how do you do this? Because I'm interested, but I saw that take time for me, and I'm really curious, like 10 years from now, what I'll like, will I be sculpting something, or what will I be choreographing at the time, or on different kinds of levels. Like I think we've talked before in terms about a making and creation process as well. I'm working on a new piece right now that I think in the end will take me 5 years to make. And I really do need support and time. And I'm an artist in residence at the theater center, and that invitation has been great. But it's also uh there's limitations to it. Like I'm getting a certain amount of time and support, and but all of that adds into what this work will build to be. But making work is harder and harder in some ways, because of course, you have to wait for these different levels of support. If making a group piece, of which this is, and equipment heavy, and it's, you know, anyways, but I also like that. I'm invested in that long-term idea and to see where it happens. Whereas my past three works I've made, I believe the three have been out in public space, and which I love, responding site specifically to spaces. And I sort of joke, but I realized it was a methodology I was working with. And I called it kamikaze with care. That I was like, okay, we don't have a lot of budget, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to work with kick-ass dancers, because I need these professionals to come in and be like, okay, here's the task. I really prepare heavily before, so that when we're in this sites of public space, which you don't always, sometimes you have to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, to be in, or you also have to make friends with your neighbors or whoever's out there. And
Yeah.
but it's like, how do we also work fast, but not lose the care of the humans and the relationships to the work or the site? But I really value that process for a while. But I am really grateful right now that this piece I'm working on now, for a while, I almost wanted it, I was like, go away, complicated idea, because you're going to be hard to make happen. And it wouldn't go away. And I really had to listen to it and say, like, okay, let's do this. And I just need to invest in the slowness of that. It will take the time it takes to work. And I even at one point had an offer. Someone wants to show it next year. And I was like, it's not done. I don't know what it is yet. And I don't want to like just give you something halfway, even though I'm like, I want that opportunity. But I actually said, can we slow down the conversation? I appreciate it, but I need more time to invest in the process of the work before that piece is ready. If they want one of my kamikaze with care pieces, let's go.
Think residencies can also happen in unexpected spaces. Like this kind of collapses the first question. From 2010 to 2015, I kind of made a residency in partnership with the Bata Shoe Museum, which came out of just like not making work that fit easily into theaters. So, yeah, I had this 5-year artist in residency process with the Bata Shoe Museum where I created like 3 works for the architecture of the building. And that wasn't a program they had, that wasn't like something you applied for. It was just something I was very interested in Raymond Moriema's architecture. They at the time were like super interested in highlighting the building. So like residencies can come, they can be established one way, like this is a residency and this is what it offers and this is what, you know, we're looking for. And then I think there's also space to think about like how do you animate unexpected spaces? Like if you are a venue-based building or a civic building, like what is your lobby? What is your outside? Like who's interested in being there has been like really transformative for me, even when I step back into theaters to consider that space for making a piece. Those 5 years were so transformative for my thinking about public, about space, about how to make a large image, because I was at that point in my career not working on large stages and I didn't have skills to make a large image. And then suddenly my stage was like 2 city blocks. So as a choreographer, I then had to think like, okay, then how do I work with this? How does the public work with this? So I just offer that as like, sometimes residencies can come out of interest in a community, in a building, in artists. Like a creative partnership can like build a residency because residencies just require time, again and again and again, going back to an idea.
I think you
Yeah.
folks touched on the second question, which was what is slow creation? Um, but also I kind of going back to highlighting what you were saying, Brandy, about non-traditional residencies and like what that looks like. But these are also still traditional spaces. So something like the Bata Shoe Museum is not necessarily like a non-traditional space. This is a traditional space, but the way that we approach um a residency isn't official. It's not advertised. It's not necessarily like there's no framework for it. It hadn't necessarily existed before. So, thinking about, especially the presenters that are in the room, like your spaces as maybe traditional spaces, how someone can think about them, how a community member thinks about them and wants to engage with it, like that might be existing already. There might be people in your community that want to work with your site and respond to your site. And so how do we become responsive to that and open up like our doors to the curiosity of makers essentially. And I think that goes into um I guess this one of the questions, which is how can presenters remain open and responsive to artists. And what did you do, Brandy, in that moment where you were curious about the Vada? How did you go through the process of reaching out, or did you already have that relationship? And then Jen, in your experience of working with artists, what are the challenges of there are challenges for people sometimes in finding artists. So what does that look like?
Go ahead, Brandy, you want to start?
Uh, the Bada originally came, it was a board member who was also on the board of the Bada and had been with ＡNANDAM for a while and was sort of understanding we weren't finding access to presentation opportunities or spaces. We were also young, right? Like when you're young, you're like, why can't I have this thing? So I'm sure we had a little bit of that. And she had said like, oh, you've also done work outside of theaters. Like, would you ever consider like, you know, a building. Like, can you choreograph a building? And are you interested? So she made the connection and the introduction. And it was a beautiful time. Miss Bada was still alive. She's passed now. And we had a big ask because once I went and sort of looked at the building and like just let the mind kind of dream a bit, like it was a piece that hung 4 artists from the roof of the Bada over a city street for its opening. And so I also like had to learn how to pitch that in a way that is both artistic and safe and like with engineering. And it required so I had to be really organized about that, how to talk about that ask, also about a piece that I hadn't made yet, right? I'm making a piece for this building. And it also was like the presenter or the partner, like the Bada Shoe Museum, obviously had a lot of questions around safety, which we were fully prepared to answer with a full engineering team. And I just remember thinking, like, I don't know if we did it. I don't know if we convinced her. People hanging off of her building. I think I blew this. And she was just really quiet. She was an incredibly elegant woman. And she was quiet for a long time. Or it felt like a long time when you're a young artist. And you're like, oh. And she just sort of looked and she said, you know, I think it's good to do these wild things. Let's try it. I was just like,
Yes.
yes, yes. So there was like within that, as delightful and cultured of a woman as she was, also as a presenter, as a partner, there was a willingness to take a risk and outline the steps that, like, how we communicate about what that risk is, and like, but like that ability to go like, yes, let's hang people over Bloor Street off of my building is a big risk. And so, yeah, it was a gift. It was a gift to have a partner, a presenter say like, yeah, let's figure this out. This can be amazing. And then we just like we would work at the building, we would work in the studio, we would have intensive periods throughout the year where we would test material we had made off-site. We rehearsed while this building was open, while it was closed. And it was delightful. It's one of the most delightful, like, triptych of pieces I've ever made in a space that, like, the staff was on board. They were really excellent. They got Raymond Moriamo, and he was also alive, came and, like, answered all my questions. And I remember him saying, you know, Brandy, you and I have the same job. And I was like very confused. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, our jobs are to consider how bodies are in space. We are doing the same thing. And I was like, oh, thank you, sir. So
That's cool.
yeah, it was really like a gift of knowledge. Yeah, yeah. So it's like something unexpected I could never have dreamed up, like came from an introduction that we were able to like mobilize from both sides, but exactly that, like 2 organizations willing to take a little bit of risk on a cultural project. It was amazing. Yeah.
It was. Way to
Oh,
go.
thank you.
Big ask too. Big ask. It's amazing.
Big ass. I don't know if I have that much confidence now. I think it was like at the start of your career, you're like, let's just make
Let's
these
do this. Let's do
do
it.
this. Let's do this. Yeah. But also, before you launch off,
Yeah.
Jen, like, so that piece, one of the pieces in the triptych was called Divergent Dances, and that piece has ended up touring. Even though the piece was made for a building, there were a couple of presenters and curators who had seen it and wanted it to come to their communities. Where I was a little bit like, how do I take something I made for a building somewhere else? And we answered that question around like where a residency and a creative partnership again come together. So we took it to Peterborough, but what we did was had a few dancers from the original piece, but we did like a 4-week residency on site in Peterborough where we integrated and worked with local artists to like remold the piece, reshape the piece, find a way through residency time to make the piece responsive to the place that it is in, which was just also, yeah, another wonderful example of like residency as iteration, residency as deeper connection to where you are. We're in the mall downtown. For those of you that know Peterborough, it can feel like a very uninspired, brutalist space that got revived. Yeah. Sorry, Jen, go ahead. My
Oh,
apologies.
great. Not at all, of course. I guess Nora, to come back to the like reaching artists, definitely like, outreach is a word, but it's really active. I always find that it's last on the budgets, sometimes on the planning, not, not always, but outreach, accessibility, there are certain things that we like as a presenters or event planners or programmers, producers to integrate earlier. So that was like, how are we, is what we are looking for getting to the right people? Like, and who are those? Sometimes you don't know. So, but I would say there can be clarity of ask, like, oh, we have this building, it wants to be animated or something, but, or you might just say like, I think a great ask too is, what do you need? It's been really helpful when someone who has something actually says to me, what do you need? And one time it was the curator at Harborfront Center. And I said, I need a tech residency, but I haven't even started the work yet, but it's such a technical piece. I need lights, sound, technicians, etc. So we started off this work with a tech residency, and someone asked, what do you need? So that's something I like to do as well, is ask people what we need, like just like open hearts, open minds, ask the question. Um, and for outreach, not assume that, oh, we're sending an akimbo or we're sending the email to our usual people, you know, considered your different ways of getting the word out there. I mean, in the very early days of Nuit Blanche, I stood at the corner of Kingston Road with a sign that said Nuit Blanche is coming to Scarborough. And I felt like I should have like be wearing like a hot dog outfit or something like that. But I was like really, and going into high schools and going to like barbecues and going to different like community centers and things like that. But outreach was not an email in that case. I had to show up and I had to say like, I had to be a real person and put a face in the name, especially if someone from the city. Um, so I think that was also, and I think through showing up, I built trust, right? Because people then got to know me, and that is relationship building. And then even like to go back to the Nuit Connects residency, we joked, but not so, I don't joke about it, but I mean, we said, no, once you're part of Nuit Connects, now you're connected with us for life. So just because your residency ends after a year doesn't mean you can't come back and ask us questions or seek our advice or call us. We are in your corner. So I really like to think of my role when I have that hat on is I am a cheerleader, I am a champion. And then it's really nice when I get to put my artist hat on that someone does that for me. And so that was like that time, like being invited into the Art Gallery of Burlington. And I actually, like, when I was like, are you sure? And like, what a gift that's been, or this theater center. And the theater center, I think with that one, I had the right idea at the right time. They're interested in the idea, but the theater center's been a relationship, 15-year relationship or more for me. But I had pitched this idea before and it didn't get accepted. And so it just seems to be like the right time and place, and they will be advocates for the work and they will be champions and cheerleaders for the work. And I like that I know how to do that for people. And then I also have to know how to accept it too when people can do that for me as well.
I think
Yeah.
the note about asking people what they need, I think that is the best question in outreach. And it could be really as simple as that. Because then you'll get all kinds of people in the community, all kinds of mediums or disciplines or um but also understanding. I think there's like this common thread, and Brandy, you're talking about, you're hanging people off a building on Bloor, and it's like you're in creation mode, you're catching artists in a very kind of vulnerable and very sometimes like unprofessional stage. When they're ready to present, that's when they are like all put together, And they've done maybe the practice or the residency or whatever it is, and but when they're in creation, when we're in creation, this is very a vulnerable situation. Like there's not as much professionalism as like a presenter might be used to interacting with. It's chaotic. It's like, well, I have these ideas and I don't even know if I believe in them yet. You're catching them in that stage. So being open to the chaos is also a part of, and these like wild asks maybe. But I also feel like, Brandy, for you to have been young and ask those questions, a lot of people, especially nowadays, I'm realizing people don't ask scary questions anymore. They're not like dreaming scary as much anymore. And you almost have to draw it out of people now to be doing that. And maybe that's like, after, COVID lockdowns, pandemic, and just reoccurring, being in a state of pandemic, that kind of climate that we're in, where, even artists ourselves are very like afraid of experimentation. So just, kind of exaggerating that, like how can people with the resources, this goes back to the slow tearing ethos, remain open and responsive to that, and make sure that yeah, the ask is as simple as, what do you need? I think that should be like the slogan of the workshop. I'm gonna go into another question if that's all right. So this is, so for artists, actually, so I guess maybe for presenters then, because we've gone into how artists can approach presenters or approach a site. But for presenters, what are some steps they could take to establishing something? And then at first would be, that outreach, which we did talk about. But then beyond that, how could a presenter go about? And I see someone in the chat here who is starting a residency.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher.
Cool.
Christopher.
Right
So
on.
for someone like Christopher as well, and then maybe even we'll ask Christopher how Christopher is doing it shortly in about 10 minutes when we go into Q&A. But what are steps that they can take, and also maybe considering that we have people from smaller towns in Ontario joining. And if any of you have experience working with small towns as well, Brandy and Jen, and how has that happened with work? And Peterborough, Brandy, you have that experience. What can you offer?
I mean, I love Peterborough. I've done a lot of work in Peterborough. Um, I actually found like very specific to my time in Peterborough was it was actually like the gap between an ask and a risk was actually much smaller. There was some sense of like how to get things done that feel like in larger spaces there's a little bit more bureaucracy or like a few more people in between the spot, like the question and the answer. So for me, that's been my main experience in working in smaller contexts. Even I just finished like a piece that was part of a show in the Surrey Art Gallery, which again is a civic space that has theaters and an art gallery. But something that consistently feels really beautiful about smaller spaces is this like throwback or consistent DIY kind of like, okay, let's figure it out. Let's do this. Let's do that way of working that for like someone who works in independent dance is really familiar with. That's been really like joyous. Jen, you had a project in Port Hope?
Yeah, Port Hope was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was that. Thank you. Thanks for that reminder. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
because that was I kind of went outside the box a little bit for myself because I wanted to start dabbling with materials a little bit more, but integrating into my choreography. And that was tail end of the pandemic in the end. But I did a choreographic procession but with interviewing people for their responses about, I think it was also about like what's helping, what's not. I can't remember. I gave people prompts, and their prompts I put on banners, and we put those banners, we carried those banners in space together as a group, and then we placed them to be an exhibition at the end. So I was also playing with the idea of um, choreography also as installation, and how does installation, how does performance stay after it's been performed in a way, which also Brandy and I worked on as part of my master's as well. And as well as Jessica Karohenga recently passed, just so much love. Just want to say Jessica's name, who was part of my master's as well. But that was very community integrated. It was based also on a festival that it was, part music festival, part like there was like kids crafts, there was a bit of dance, and I think it was the support of the presenter that that really said like, we know this is new for you, and how do we support you? And that was really helpful and gave me a bit of I took a risk, they took a risk, and we were able to do something that I think worked out well. And I definitely know Port Hope so much better now. And we stopped there all the time before on our way to Montreal, but now we really know which cafes and which muffins we like and all that kind of stuff. And the amazing bakery and da da da. Yeah, and also recently presented a work in Victoria, If I Should Stumble. And that was very DIY in some ways as well. The DIY aspect, I think, I don't know, as artists and dance artists, you often do a lot of things yourself. That's just because you can doesn't mean you should. But when you want to, those skills, I think it's more of an attitude as well. And I feel like I bring that into my presenting and producing as well. That we're like, what do we have to do to make this happen? And um, I'm happy to just help um, I would say steward a work as an artist, as a performer, as a choreography, or as a producer. And that can mean, some real high art moments, or it means like, what are you taking your coffee? Right? And there's nothing kind of beneath me really that I'm just as a silly example, but just to say, I think it gives you that like care for work, care for the moment. How do you make that happen? Um, when we need to be DIY. And an example of that one was I was like, can we get the public space bathroom cleaned? Because we're working public space. And the team unfortunately didn't have the capacity for that. And I said, there's no way in hell my performers are not having a cleanish bathroom. So I was like, scrubby, scrubby, scrub. No big deal. Just like flow onto the next thing, make it happen. Bit of a segue on cleaning products, but there you go.
We will switch over to Q&A shortly. But I guess this is not necessarily on our list of questions, but from your experience as administrators and artists, what are the current like present day challenges of creating a residency? What are you seeing? Are there challenges in participation, challenges in funding, challenges in how limits that venues and presenters have these days that they might not have in the past? What is the current, I guess, like climate of a creation partnership that you're experiencing?
I think one of them is that people are kind of tapped out. Like, what do people actually have to offer? I think there's funding challenges out there to be sure. That is tough, and we're not at the best stage of that in um, Toronto, Ontario, Canada right now. But that's challenging. But then I think also it's like realizing it can be great to say, here's what I do have, but then not expecting, I guess, like something like a fulsome piece to come back if you're like, you know what, I have 20 hours of space. Not that that would be the arrangement, but that exchange that we think about the reciprocity or the expectations around that. But that a little thing can also go a long way. But I think, um, and I think also people are kind of tired and burnt out. I think people are still coming back to find their energy on both sides, artists and presenters, and figuring out how what are audiences engaging with and what's exciting people. And but I also walk into rooms like that are audiences that are full. And I think people want liveness. People want live art, and live art it's it's not going anywhere. So we also are in this incredibly powerful moment where liveness, I think we're going to come back to, we're going to double down on, we're going to see that be collect coming together and collectively watching something, cheering a work on, feeling something together. Um, I hope that we'll continue to see that investment deepen. But I think also risk. I think it comes back to people being able to take a risk and say, let's see what happens. And some places are more practiced at that than others. Yeah. Go ahead, Brandy.
I think, like, yeah, we all know we're in a hard, maybe getting harder funding moment. Funding can be public funding, funding can be like donor funding, all the things. But I think it's helpful for both presenters and artists to really think about what is needed when. I know if I've had 20 hours in the first week, I do not need everyone in the room for a public showing at the end of that. Like, that's for the way I work. I need people who know the process or who have held my work for a long time to see that. Like Jenn is saying, like, there's a certain point where more time and more space isn't going to help me. I need to address technical issues in the development of this show. And that's what is needed is a technical residency. And if it's just a space residency, that's amazing, but it's not going to help this particular piece. So those conversations, not only what do you need, but what is needed when, and that's going to be different for each artist, each process. Like if you're bringing someone in who's building a work versus bringing an artist in to build a work for a community or a space, those are two different entry points. And then also in this environment, like what can we do with what we have? So sometimes constraints are like good at freeing the imagination towards risk instead of like shrinking our imagination to sort of a smaller capacity. It's like, here's the constraints, be it time, be it money, be it space. Then what can we do with what we have is something that I think is really useful both for artists and presenters.
And to be upfront about that as
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
just lay it because you never know. I mean, there was one, it was years ago, but when someone said, "Can you make something for this space?" And it was for a stage, but it ended up to be I saw the stairs, and this is when I made a work called If I Should Stumble. And it continues on. And it was only from that ask, someone to say, we only have this much money. And so I thought, anyways, but you never know. Sometimes you can have the right moment and the right space. And I gathered some resources, and this is when my kamikaze with care methodology started, which turned out to be a really good phase of my um, creation period. Even though at first I was like, "Ah, it's not a lot, and da da da. This work is like a foundational work in my repertoire, and it's become very special." And from one ask from one curator to say, can you do you, anything here for this? Yeah. Never know.
I also feel like another component of this is also that if you're in a position to ask, what do you need? You might not be the person to give that. You might be the person to connect the artist with another person that can. And that's why it's so important to ask that question because it's not necessarily that the labor will be yours. In the case of Jenn and needing that tech residency, which is very specific. And so, someone else, if they had an offering, and you were looking for a tech residency, it might have just been an email from them to someone else to make that introduction. So really sometimes you're facilitating a relationship as an administrator, and that's kind of all you're doing. And so it really just being open to supporting artists, and having, you know, that kind of broad offering is it's also it's scary sometimes as an administrator that doesn't have, like, if you don't have an existing residency to get yourself into that, you know, boat of like, oh my gosh, how much labor am I going to end up doing? But really
Mhm.
it's, and like I have worked, my previous job was at Ontario Culture Days, where I was the senior artistic producer of a province-wide residency program, and co-created a residency program at Whippersnapper Gallery, which I'm still running part-time sometimes, and with one artist a year. And so, and residencies, and this is the beginning of the conversation, was that residencies, artists are perpetually in residency.
Mm.
You know, I'm an artist from Scarborough, and Jen spoke about how we work in Scarborough, and we, you know, we kind of have like this mentality of we have to find people around us that are in community that want to make, artists from Scarborough have a lot to say. So we find people that we want to say it with, and we try to find the tools. And so artists are already kind of doing that. And so it's not so scary of a task for an administrator to come in, since that work is already happening. It's really probably one of the tasks that are the least demanding of your role as an administrator. And I'm saying that as an administrator myself. So this is a wonderful conversation.
Can I just add to that, Nor, too? I do. It took me a while to realize this, but I think as like programmer, presenter, etc., I started to realize this is a part of my job description is actually to connect people. It's like a hard skill. But it's easy. You know what I mean? I can just be like, you should know that person. But it is something that sometimes when I can't offer more, sometimes I can offer that. And and it's a really powerful offering. It can be. That's it.
What a beautiful note to end off at. Um, I'm going to open it up to questions from the group. You feel free to use the chat, but also feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Also, Christopher, really curious about your artist collective and the new residency and any questions you may have.
Or tell us about it, Christopher. I want to know. I'm curious.
I know, dish. No pressure though.
Chandel, I see you.
I was enjoying hearing from both of you ladies doing fabulous jobs. One of the things that I was reflecting on as you spoke about alternative spaces that you're working in, whether it was the stair piece or Brandy at the Battersea Museum, I recall seeing that piece. Well done in both cases. But that those conversations certainly about the materials that we have, whether it's the rooms that we are uh, the holders of in physical space where we can say, hey, artist, you are more than welcome to come use this space. Or considerations as a dialogue when we have these buildings of saying, how is it being unused by the public? And having those really open conversations with third parties, whether it's the artists, whether it's members of the community, whether it's someone that you say, I'm gonna bring children into my space and ask them, what do you picture here? Because we're all able to come into them with such different viewpoints, whether it's saying, I foresee how nicely it would be to hang off your walls and crawl the outside, because it does have, and that consideration of both the interior, but also the exterior of the buildings that we hold, because so often we do expect folks to come to our venues. But that conversation of how are we getting them there? Are we Pied Pipering them along the route? Are we having them see something for the very first time and actually turn and see the building and what it relates to? It does opens up conversations about dead space, as it were. So bringing it to life and slowing down and bringing our areas to life in those ways are an interesting concept that you bring up here. And also considering when doing slow touring, breaking into other areas that you say, well, maybe I don't have space here, but I have a friend that has some space down the hall, and we could collaborate to do things by working back and forth. So thanks for unpacking those notions.
And you spoke so eloquently to it as well, Shondell. That was great. It really is looking at our spaces differently, and then the invitations may change. You know, I got to
And
do
I
Stumble at Capicoa, that was
Yeah.
great, and Aaron and the whole Capicoa team was such an advocate for different things to be able to make something happen at a unique space that you weren't normally going to present work in. You know, so thank you for that. That was great.
And I think it also, I definitely feel this. I don't know if other people in the world feel this, but like the sort of bringing alive art spaces, I still think we're in the process of that from the pandemic. Like to really make our buildings and our spaces vibrating and pulsating with liveness. Like we're in that project. It's like easy to turn off, but it's like, yeah, moving that back into motion is requires strategy, I think. Yeah, offer that.
I think that's also what Jenny was speaking of, is that the outreach part is like the last thing you think of and like the last column in the budget then. And it's how do we think of that first and integrate it early?
And I'm sure that's not the case for everyone. I just found that too often from spaces I've been in that, or it gets cut. There's an outreach person, and then they're like, times are tight. There goes that person.
'Cause I don't
Now you're doing it. That's happened a lot too. Like as a pro, it was supposed to be like two jobs, and then it's like, okay, I'm going to do that too, and then you don't get to do it as well because you're doing it off the side of your desk, you know?
Yeah, or it
100.
just gets cut like
Yeah,
completely and then dispersed on a team that can't.
yeah,
That's also just like extra. It's like an actual real skill set and
yeah.
job.
Not everyone should be in the hot dog outfit at the corner. But
Nobody's
hey,
on the road anymore, Jen. There's a opportunity there again.
yeah, exactly. Maybe I turned it into a performance piece now. Before it was administrative work, and now it should be a performance piece.
Yeah.
Haley, you had a question.
Mm.
Suppose I could also speak out loud. I'm just in since Noor and I coordinate tours here at Ontario Presents. That's on my brain, the connection between residencies and touring, and what presenters that are maybe not in urban areas or not in big urban centers, what they can offer artists willing to. I mean, it sounds like you have both done residencies out in different places. It also strikes my mind, is it like difficult or a pain to be offered residencies kind of in different geographical areas, what role that could play?
I mean,
Yeah, I think go
yeah,
ahead,
go
Brandy.
ahead.
You go.
Oh, I've only just found it delightful in the sense of like very much one of the functions of art making is about how we meet each other. And so touring isn't, I mean, maybe when you start off and you think touring is really glamorous, we all know it's like the least glamorous thing one might ever do. But the interest is that we get to meet other people, to think together differently, to practice being guests and hosts in different ways is like, these are fundamental to art making as well. So I've worked a lot, I predominantly make my living as a professional artist not working in Toronto, simply because there isn't enough work here to do that. So the way things connect through smaller tours, residency to touring, I think are very important, and really needed, and then continue to enrich works. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's context and how a work works in one place might be very different than somewhere else. Like it's an example from quite a few years ago, but I had a project called the Movement with Jessica Rose, and we used to run. We had a project called Run with Art, and we would run through museums, do 5 or 10K through museums that would let us. And we were in Melbourne Museum, which we were very lucky to do. But they brought us in for 3 weeks, which was like that was pretty dreamy. But we also got to know a community by the time people showed up for the actual project, we are having this run because we were asking, can we run things better collectively? And then we're not strangers to them. We've been, 3 weeks is only 3 weeks. But the other thing to say, just like different contexts as well, at the time I had a solo that I was doing, and it started off, I sort of stumble on stage and say, I'm sorry, and it starts this list of excuses. And when I was rehearsing, I think the presenter saw that I started the work with, I'm sorry, and she said, oh no, you can't do that here. There was a whole apology going on for, colonization to Indigenous people. And I'm sorry meant something very different than it did in Canada at the time. So again, this was 15, 20 years ago. So thankfully that presenter helped me catch that. And I came on and said something like, excuse me, or something like that. But I'm sorry. Anyways, context. And that's learning and care in each other's communities. Also, can residencies tour? Oh, she'll work then.
I mean, I've had that, Noor. The question is, can residencies tour? And at what point does it become actual work then? I mean, I think it's all actual work. I just find that work joyous. And I think it's work because it's skilled work. It's like work we've been trained to do. Yeah, and we have skills to do it. But like, I've had a lot of touring with a piece called The Glaciology, which is a very slow piece. It's a pile of human bodies rolling through an environment at a glacial pace, like just a human glacier. And that's toured a lot because I tour it as a residency format. Again, 1 or 2 dancers, working with people in the communities and cities, and then performing with them. But it always is led with like a week to 2 weeks of residency to like learn the context of the piece, learn the techniques, practice it in public space, understand how the context changes in different countries and cities. So that's a piece that's linked inherently with a residency in order for it to tour, because it is a big piece. So you can't tour, it's very difficult to tour 20 to 100 bodies around the world doing a slow human glacier. It's like much more interesting to work with the bodies in places. So that's been my experience, where they both like meet as a system. Yeah.
We do
I like that as well. I was gonna say with If I Should Stumble, we're trying to make this work as well. Integrate local performers and intergenerational and things like that. And it is about trying to ask for like a little bit more time. I don't think it would need a glaciology amount of time, but it does. It's a different type of work that has these types of work that have this porous nature, that it actually asks for community connection, involvement, and presence, and is needed, and that bit of time is needed to make that authentic.
And it feels super ethical. Like it just feels
Yeah.
super, like there are some works that are a work, but like I do notice, like we land, we go to the theater, we tack, we perform, and so like I'm often only seeing my hotel room, the people I'm working with, and whatever food I can put in my mouth. And so that is one way of touring, but like the money is being paid to me, my team is taking it out of the thing. you maybe only talk to the most bold person at the reception after. Like that's fine. That's a structure, but like
Yeah.
this kind of thing is like you have to develop a relationship with community members, with artists there, and like I've had like even from doing divergent dances in Peterborough, like I still have those relationships that continued as artistic, continued as donors into the years. Like I know that through the activity of art, I cultivated like relationships that had depth, much more depth than when I just like drop in, do the work, people like it or don't. That's like a taste thing, and then leave. Like I can feel that difference, very tangible in my life.
And we see this, approach with like a young audience. There's always usually a workshop component the same day or a day before, and with Ontario Presents, we organize young audience work that tours across Ontario, and there is that. Okay, we want to book a workshop with 3 schools and Chanel can also probably speak to this as well, as an organizer in her community in Temiskaming, but that's kind of inherent in YA. So why isn't it in like adults or even like
Mhm.
colleges, to have that kind of like community connection and workshop period? But that essentially is a residency
Yeah.
then, where you're building that connection and you're also in a way like practicing before the actual performance. Um, yeah, I'm starting to
There's
think of it differently now as
No,
well.
that's beautiful. Like even to think of it like maybe you are interested in a choreographer or a theater, like commission that person to be in your community over like I know there's certain kinds of residencies and fellowships in the States where it's like a 3 year, I mean they're dealing with a large pot of money, but like one of the conditions is you have to come and live there for a good portion of each year because they are very clear that it is about the benefit of the community interacting with the artist rather than the artist like extracting. I don't mean like big E extracting, but like yeah, it just reverses that kind of thing. Like so you can bring different ideas, different practices, different aesthetics to your spaces and then have them in a very deep and meaningful and direct experience way move into your community. It's a beautiful form of working.
I was also recently we're in Aurelia in terms of like smaller town, but again, it was like Kate Hilliard is a curator who's working in Arts Aurelia, and we kept trying to figure out. I think as a presenter and an artist, we just wanted to work with each other, and then some time and space came up. It was a bit awkward for she didn't know what to put in it. I had a bit of space, so I didn't bring a space in my calendar, so I just brought the composer and myself there instead of I sort of simplified what I'm normally working on. But again, it was a drive. I'm like, I can carve out space for me to do this. She gave me a little bit of investment with that, a place to stay. And then and Aurelia for me is also where my grandfather's from. And then I got to kind of just be in this space that I don't know how that's going to seed later, but I've been nodding back to Aurelia in different ways. But then at one point there was other people working in the building, and Kate said, "You can totally say no, but could we invite them in to watch?" And I think, and I was just like, "Sure, no problem," because it's not even the real thing anyways. And they ran around, I ran around, they watched me run around the space and sort of work on something. But it was really nice to meet local artists who were also in the same building working on something. And I didn't feel that precious about it because the whole residency wasn't that precious. It was just a bit like, I have something. I said, yes, I can do it. And then in the end, there was also this massive snowstorm, which really tested my winter driving, which I had been wanting to do because I wasn't sure about my confidence. And so now I feel really good about my winter driving. It was off the charts, white out, but we got home. So these sort of back end pluses and quirks. Not really, but you know.
Adele, I see you again.
I have another thought. I'm, s- I'm inspired by the notion of in sort of a mentorship slash exchange in the tourism process, the touring process, in that there are some conversations that will occur around, oh, well, we are situated in this location, and we should, if we're going to put money towards a residency, we should really do it locally here. But it could have the conversation certainly around mentorships and intergenerational knowledge sharing, exchange of art forms, certainly in the movement physical theater community that I enjoy. There's a lot of desire to have these exchanges across art forms and entering into areas that our folks are saying this is open play space. This is jiving with other creator space. There is certainly a feeling, I'd say in the north, of isolation, but also in sector, as everyone's like working in their little pods with those groups that they regularly create with, by putting into different scenarios where you are exchanging with the public and saying it's open form. You're not going to see anything that is finished at this time, but you could inspire the creation process forward, or and have that public element. I know Empty Space in Waterloo area, that's something that they're very strong supporters of, but certainly framing some of these either residency or slow touring processes around the thought of how it could go both ways, so that you are able to create more dialogue and inter-artistic exploration, as you're saying, Jen, like dance and clay play, right? Like they can inspire each other, absolutely. And they do. Oh.
Yeah.
Chandela, you're on fire. I feel like I'm learning the most.
Yeah, ideas.
Love a good idea.
Oh, nice.
But it's true. It's absolutely, who knows? You're going to put different pieces of something together, and if it sparks like that, yeah, I think that's really exciting. And again, I think that can be exciting offering to artists too, and sometimes to meet different artists, to work with different people. You never know what that spark is going to come from. Like what is going to come from that spark.
Yeah. And also that kind of like is like a soft ramp into risk, right? If everyone's engaging in like new learning or new relationships, like that's also risk involves a little bit of an unknown, and that's like a nice meeting place to even plant a small seed that way.
And also setting up space, and I think Nora, you spoke to this a bit as well too, but that it's vulnerable sometimes to be in process. And because in many cases, we value the outcome, we value this, like what we see as a finished product. But it's also, I think people do really like behind the scenes if we set it up properly, like a glimpse, into process. And we know it in different ways, the actor studio and all this, but can we continue to do that in our fields where it still supports the work, it still supports the artist? But there's a relationship building with audience and with presenters, and there's a sharing opportunity instead of waiting like, oh, here's 5 years from now and this piece is finished. And then we're all like, where are we then? Sharing can be very beneficial also at different stages. And I do think it adds, I think it can also, there's an issue of, I think, of value of that process has value to it rather than just outcome.
Another thing that I just want highlighting, kind of like a thread of continuing through the workshop today, has been just like the importance of like interdisciplinary arts, and establishing those relationships across disciplines, and performing art centers maybe having relationship with art galleries, because if you don't have the answers, they might. And so seeing things more like fluid within your communities, and I think we're moving more and more towards even administrators these days not coming from a particular discipline, but coming from more interdisciplinary studies and interdisciplinary arts, so that really what's happening then. If we are in the state of like crisis with funding, then we need to work together. And so again, that's another like approach of just being a product of Scarborough and needing to operate that way. If I can't find this in film, I have to find this in performance, or I have to find this in music, or I have to find this in visual arts. And so I think it like, you know, it's important. And it could in fact be easier in smaller communities to build a relationship with that art gallery right in front of you rather than, you know, in a city like Toronto where it's just actually there's a lot. There's a huge contact list. And it can be overwhelming. But thank you for the conversation today. I think that I have a lot to think about, and a lot that is actually going to inform my work at OP, which is really, really lovely. So thank you both so much. Any last words from the both of you?
Thank you. Feeling really grateful to be with you all for a little bit of time this afternoon. And it's really interesting to to have this dialogue and be asked these questions too, because it makes us reflect and think about it as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I echo that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. I'm going to share the presentation slide again with the thank you and the link to the slow touring sessions, and previous sessions will be live on there as well. Thank you all for joining us. And Jen and Brandy, I'll just say bye to you after.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Kaylee, I think you can start recording.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming out.
Bye, y'all.